Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion, here live at CommunityKit. It's an exciting day, WWDC. Also with me is Matt Massicotte. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show again, in live and in person.
Thank you very much, Leo, for inviting me.
So we're going to talk about the stuff that was revealed today. We probably haven't had a chance to open up Xcode. But before we do that, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, sure. Thank you. My name is Matt, and been a long-time Apple developer. I have this hyper specialization now working in Swift concurrency, but I still pay attention to lots of other stuff that are going on.
Awesome. So, yeah, what's your initial reaction from everything?
Well, okay, so I'm very interested in the technical details, and I was kind of hoping for some more technical stuff going into the State of the Union. And so I want to now look more at the APIs and see what kind of stuff are actually introduced.
Yeah, I think that's the same thing here. There's a lot of fascinating stuff that we'll go over today, but I also think at the same time I really want to get my hands dirty and try it out with Xcode and stuff. I'll just start off talking about some of the stuff that I found fascinating just from the keynote. We got foundation models. So what's been heavily rumored and kind of on everybody's wish list is we actually have LLM models to work with in the apps, in our app development, but also there's a lot of stuff in Xcode that looks cool that might be useful.
Yeah, it looks like it supports a very live, interactive coding system, which I think a lot of people enjoy.
Also, you can plug into other LLMs,
right,
which sounds really great. As a fan of stuff like Cursor and Claude, I'm really looking forward to playing around with that. The intelligent shortcuts. So have you worked with App Intents at all?
Only a little bit.
So that looks really interesting. We've been hearing over the last few years, guys, start implementing App Intents. And this feels like the first taste of this is why they've been telling us to do that for so long. And then the other thing that we've been wanting for the last 15 years is Windows in iPad. How excited are you about that?
I'm a very casual iPad user, but I know people are excited, and I'm excited too for them to get what they want.
You're an iPad movie watcher, aren't you?
Pretty much.
Okay. And that's okay. That's okay. We'll forgive you. I'm really interested in how sharing, drag and drop, that kind of windowing is a very good solid step, and I'm going to install it tonight probably and try it out. But to me, the interactions between the different apps, because we just have the share sheet and we have drag and drop, that to me is the next step and seeing how well that works in this new paradigm that we have with the OS UI.
I think that Apple's clearly experimented a lot with user interface paradigms with iPad over the years, and I think that's great. And it's also kind of nice to see that after all this different experimentation, they've come back to something so familiar, because it's totally possible if it could have gone the other way, that they hit on something very different that works well, and maybe that came towards the Mac, for example.
Right. I mean, I don't know how else they could possibly do it. That's what I'm seeing is we see this, we've seen other things tried, Stage Manager, all that stuff. And at the end of the day, yeah, that's what they've come back to is windowing. So, we have to talk about it. I'm sorry, but what's been rumored for the last few months, the thing that's not Apple Intelligence, and that is the new glass design. What do you think?
I didn't get a good enough. I feel like I need to actually use it
100%.
to make have a real opinion on it.
Yes, exactly.
There was a lot of motion effects that you saw, and that's very interesting to me. Many people have been worried about readability and contrast, and
yes,
it looks very justified with what we saw. So I'm hoping that isn't as bad as it looked like it could be.
Or at the very least, we have a bunch of accessibility modifiers.
I'm sure that will be there.
Are you going to try and chime and see how it works?
Yeah, actually, I'm very interested, in particular, how it looks in macOS and how it affects macOS apps.
Yeah, right. Yeah, same here. So I recently, right before I left, I got a Mac Mini M4, another computer, because I need another Mac for my CI stuff. I think I'm going to put Tahoe, which is the new code name. I'm going to put it on there and test out my apps on that and see how it works, because I'm really curious.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So one thing I know, besides concurrency, that you're enthusiastic about is TextKit.
Yes.
So now we got all of this new attribute. So they have all this new attributed string stuff that's been added to Swift UI. Does that help you at all? Or are you like, no, this isn't cut it for me?
My suspicion is that it will be absolutely insufficient for editing large documents or doing sophisticated, more than just having like basic user input and changing a string. And it'll support anything like that.
Okay. There was a bunch of new APIs it looked like they added, at least on the iOS end, for maybe not text editing, but just being able to build. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see once we play around with it and see what we get.
And I know many people have the need for a rich text editing experience.
Is it enough for them?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. All right, let's get into, unless there was something else you wanted to mention about the Keynote. I just had stuff about CarPlay, which I'm a big fan of CarPlay. I love it.
Yeah, and it sounds like it got a lot of attention.
We've been hearing a lot about CarPlay Ultra on some of the newer models, renting vehicles. I miss CarPlay. I can tell you that. And it was cool to see. It looked like it was the interface that they were demoing, by the way, it looked exactly like the interface on our Ford Transit.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, I recognize that. That looks like my minibus.
Widgets on CarPlay.
That sounds awesome. Definitely, it's on my bucket list to play around with CarPlay. I have a lot of good ideas. Hold Assist looks really great. Finally, I'm glad to see that.
I missed that. What is this?
Okay, so when you're on hold, it can either detect hold music or something, but basically it will let you know when you're on hold and somebody finally picks up.
I see.
There's like a new wrist flick interaction on the watch, which I love because I don't always have two hands available to me.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I am looking forward with trying out the iPhone karaoke feature in tvOS, especially with the kiddos. So we'll see how that works out. Okay, so State of the Union. Anything you wanted to talk about State of the Union, or should I just go through my list?
Go through your list. I'm sure we can pick up stuff.
Okay. So about the glass design, we have the colors informed by the context. It's curved with the display. A lot of mentions about that.
Absolutely.
Constancy, is that the word? Constancy? They use that word quite a bit.
I didn't notice that.
Okay, that was weird. It automatically updates with recompile. Okay, here's a question. Was there something through this new glass design that they are trying to hint at possible new models of the iPhone?
Okay, I want to put that question on hold for 1 second. I want to call out something else that you just said, which was you have to recompile to pick up this changes.
Yes.
And that was interesting to me because presumably the reason they're doing that is they're putting this check in to make sure that you have at least built your app once. They're not opting existing apps in.
Right.
So I think if you have an app that you don't update, it will not receive this
100%.
new UI treatment.
Yeah.
It does.
Has that always been the case?
That kind of thing has happened frequently.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, it's a little bit. It reminds me of the initial iPad where those iPhone apps were running in like that tiny window mode.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, that's more severe, but I think that's the kind of thing that's going on.
There's still probably apps like that.
I'm sure. Absolutely.
Was it Instagram? Instagram doesn't do that anymore as of a few months ago. So thank you, Instagram. A few months ago, they just released an iPad app. Good on them. Good on them. So, yeah, future iPhones. What do you think? Is there something about this? It's like, oh yeah, this will work great on foldable iPhones, or this will be like.
That's an interesting question.
Because I'm looking out for hints of that.
Well, I don't know. The iPad changes are very interesting because they kind of feel like they had to take a lot of screen size considerations into account.
Mm-hmm.
On iPad mini.
Oh my gosh.
Like on a mini.
Yeah. No, a mini, from my understanding, is just a scaled down iPad. It's actually scaled down.
Everything looks the same. I didn't see anything that stuck out to me, especially in terms of the UI, hinting at new hardware, but I could believe it.
One of the things we talked about, Peter and I, on the last episode was like, are they trying to do something with the crease that's going to be the inevitable problem with foldable iPhones? And is this glass design and the curved display and all this stuff, is that a way of them trying to address it in a way kind of like, Dynamic Island would, or, the front display on the Vision Pro they each address certain limitations of the hardware.
Okay, well, this is a stretch, but imagine you have this phone that has a little bit of visual distortion, a display, that has a little bit of visual distortion right in the middle. Treatments, you potentially incorporate that deficiency into the user interface to make it look less like a mistake and more like an intentional thing.
Would it be like a book as opposed to like a single display?
Yeah, maybe like a book.
There you go, Apple. You got it. You got the idea now. Go with it. I like that. I like that a lot. I think that's pretty good. Anything else about the design? I think we talked about it in the earlier piece. Anything else you want to cover with it? I don't have a lot until I actually try it out.
I'm very interested in how it looks on the Mac in particular. I like very minimalistic interfaces in general, and it looked to me from what we saw a lot of Xcode actually, and Xcode certainly seems like it adopted this new stuff, and it was a much more minimal looking interface, but it's hard to get a feel for it until you try it yourself.
So, good segue. Let's talk about Xcode.
Okay.
Did you see the thing that everybody loves about the new Xcode?
What was the thing everybody loved?
Settings. Because they adopted the same settings layout as system settings.
I did notice this.
How do you feel about that?
Well, Xcode has less settings than the system, so I think it could potentially work well. What do you think about it?
I don't hate system settings as much as most people, but I sympathize with folks who don't like it. Having said that, I usually can find what I'm looking for because there's a spotlight search function at the top.
Yes.
That'll take me where I want to go.
Separate things you don't like that people usually don't like about settings.
Yes.
The actual setting, the search works well.
Yep.
And then a separate thing is that the actual implementation on this is on the right-hand side, inside of the
toggles,
content,
check
they have a lot of strange behaviors.
Yes.
So I guess Xcode could bring that along too, but I bet you it doesn't.
So let's get into Xcode. Xcode we can now hook up into LLM models.
Yes, huge focus on that.
There's this one thing I wrote down was a new playground macro, which might make it easier to quickly test code.
Very interesting.
Play around. And playgrounds was like specifically mentioned as a great use case to play around with LLMs, which I find really fascinating. And I'm looking forward to trying that out. I don't know about how fixing code, especially Matt, for you, fixing code that is not concurrency set up correctly, if the LLMs are going to do a great job at it.
So when they showed this UI, it reminded me a lot of the rename feature concept, but I have had very poor luck with this working correctly. Now, that's a little different because that is intended to be a precision tool that works 100% correctly or not at all.
Right,
And that's
right.
This is not that way. So it might not be subject to the same problems, but it certainly made me hesitate when I saw it.
Until we try it out, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was such a big focus on that. I was interested in the UI changes. That was definitely something I wanted to check out.
Yeah.
There was a big focus on the LLM integration. People seemed excited about it.
Yeah. By the way, I finally figured out how to get the macOS 26 VM to work. It gives you an installation error in Bushel. If you have to install Xcode 26 to get the VM to work.
Interesting. That's possible. There's all kinds of things that I'm sure are broken or incorrect in the first betas. That
Really? You shouldn't put it on your primary phone.
Yeah.
It's almost worth letting my phone crash for that. Okay, let's talk about, so machine learning. Was there anything in there that you were interested in?
Well, the impression that I got from them was that they really thought about what people are looking for out of these tools and ways to give them really easy to integrate systems into their code. And that whole thing, there was like it looks like it was macro supported or something along those lines to be able to define they're using actual Swift types that
Yes.
you can put in and get out again.
Right.
And I think that will be very appreciated by many people.
There's this like generative
Yeah.
macro that I saw, which sounds really interesting. Not only have they been emphasizing the use of app intents in our apps, but they've made it easier, I feel like, this year to do that as well. And it definitely feels like guys, really get on the page, like start getting app intents so that your stuff is discoverable. And especially the big emphasis on the new Spotlight. So this is a macOS thing.
I think that might have been true on the phone as well.
Right. Sorry. That is true on the phone. Yeah, you're right. But it seems like, yeah, like they're making it easier and they're trying to continue to emphasize the use of app intents and generative and that kind of stuff. And shortcuts. Shortcuts too looks amazing what you can do on macOS with app intents and shortcuts and the machine learning type stuff you can do in there. So I'm excited to try that out.
Absolutely. I haven't played enough with app intents to have a really good opinion on this, but if you're excited, then I'm excited about it.
I don't have a use case off the top of my head. I will have a use case, I'm sure. Once I've done app intents before, and it's absolutely fascinating what you can do with it, but there's just so much potential. I think that's what I'm excited about. I want to skip Swift stuff because that'll be the stuff we'll really deep dive into.
Sure.
So we got 3D charts, which looked really cool. You can do 3D graphing, idle prefetch for better lists.
Oh yeah, they really focused on that.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
specifically Mac OS, which
Well, I think it's received a lot of criticism because I have certainly spent time working on list performance on the Mac.
Okay.
And it isn't necessarily a straightforward thing. So I think it's received a lot of criticism, and that's why.
is it just not do very well, or is it hard to play around with, or what? Because to me, like, the list challenge was always because iOS devices they're just constrained on memory by far compared to Mac OS. So I always thought Mac OS wasn't a big deal. Am I totally incorrect in that?
No, you're right that the Mac has access to more memory in general, but I don't think that's typically the problem.
Okay.
And I think that in comparison to iOS, for example, which I have done less work on, but in the Mac, there's many performance pitfalls.
Okay. That's good to know. I don't do gaming.
Yeah, I don't think that many people will either.
Have they done less game demos now that they pre-record this?
That's an interesting question.
Do Cyberpunk, they did that, and they did some other game, but it was pretty brief.
Well, they have done too much of an emphasis on demos and not enough of an emphasis on here are the things we are building that are nice for game developers. It's a
Right.
developer conference, and I like to focus on that.
Right. I think they felt, you know what it is? Switch 2 came out last week, and they're like, yeah, we shouldn't try to like one up Nintendo.
Perhaps.
So let's keep it slim. But yeah, they did do a lot as far as game development was concerned. The new gaming stuff does sound, if I was a gamer or game developer, it does sound cool what you could do. So we'll see how that goes. Vision OS, we have better anchoring. We have to go to the other room if we want to talk about that. So, but yeah, I mean, Vision OS, it definitely seems like they're still building stuff for it. So we'll see how
Absolutely.
that goes. All right, let's get into.
But if I'm not wrong, though, there wasn't a major focus on a new version of Vision OS. It seemed like minor changes.
Okay,
Is that your impression?
I don't know because I haven't done any Vision OS.
Okay. It didn't feel like there's any major changes that are coming.
Yeah. So Swift. So big changes. We see continued maturity of concurrency,
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, what's your thoughts on where Swift 6.2 is as far as concurrency is concerned?
Well, if you go back to last year, so 6.0, I was convinced that the team was going to release 6.0, and at the same time, they were also going to do all the work to, at the very least, have correct annotations for all of Apple's own SDKs. This was my assumption, and that did not happen.
Right.
6.0 was a very big release, and it came with it quite a lot of bugs. So then we have 6.1, which came afterwards, and that fixed a tremendous amount of bugs. And actually also, along that way, there have been a number of Xcode releases. Those have also begun to iteratively include more annotations in the SDK. Very welcome stuff. Brings along some major changes, but major, not in terms of the language functioning differently, it does in a few ways, but mostly it's major changes to give you tools to be able to ease migration into this new language mode.
Right.
What I haven't been able to figure out, and it doesn't seem like anybody has talked about anything, is changes to annotations for the SDKs. Like one thing I looked at, for example, a library that I have had very little experience using, but a lot of experience helping people with, is AV Foundation.
Okay.
AV Foundation is quite hard to use with concurrency. It's very dispatch focused and is missing a lot of annotations, for example.
Okay.
And so far, there are a lot of new things in it, but I don't think there's anything related to concurrency that has changed.
I looked at virtualization, and yeah, it doesn't look like.
Now it's still at beta 1, so there still is room for these things to change. That's, it happens.
Okay, if you say so.
There is still, I don't think there's zero hope, but I'm a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more emphasis there.
Yeah.
However, I will say there was an important compiler change that de-emphasizes the need for some of these annotations.
You want to go?
No, so specifically, they changed the rules around importing Objective-C code.
Okay.
So when you
go ahead.
import Objective-C code,
Yeah.
I'm all ready to do this because it's part of my talk, right? When you import Objective-C code, if you look at a function parameter, for example, the compiler assumes that it's escaping.
Okay.
And then you can tell it in Objective-C, oh, actually, this is a non-escaping thing. So that's a very conservative assumption that it makes.
Okay.
You follow what I'm saying?
So do they add a keyword?
You have to add these annotations because Objective-C doesn't need this information at all. This is only for right. It assumes the worst case, and then you put this special annotation to say actually not escaping.
Okay.
But for sendable, which is much more important and more consequential if you get it wrong,
Yeah.
it assumes non-sendable, which is it makes it easier in some cases to use, but if it's wrong, the consequences are really terrible.
Right.
So now if it can determine this is a completion handler, it will assume sendable, which will result in more warnings, but also it's way more safer. It's a much more conservative.
Okay.
And I like this.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
This will actually help with AV Foundation. I was just complaining about it, but it will make things better.
Okay. Yeah, it's really great that they've continued to make Objective-C friendlier for Swift.
Just annotating the code with more information.
It's not enforced, but
I don't actually think this kind of stuff, I don't think the Objective-C compiler makes use of this at all.
right, exactly. It's like it doesn't care, but Swift will.
Yep.
The one thing I want to talk about, so we finally have what's basically static sized arrays.
Oh, yes.
My understanding was this was useful in the embedded space, but it sounds like it's also going to be pretty useful in the server side space as well, and in a few other places.
My guess would be that it's useful in any context where you're dealing with known fixed size data.
Right.
I think it will be a performance, how much of a performance win it is, I suppose, depends on the situation.
Why didn't they have this in the first place?
I don't have a good answer for that. My understanding is that there were some changes, like this ability to put an integer as a generic.
That is crazy. That looks nuts.
They probably had to, and I don't really know how that works exactly, but I suspect that there was a lot of type system work. And you can see this kind of trend happens a lot in Swift where they have some end goal that's quite far away, and they make a lot of changes along the way to be able to finally implement that. And I think this is one of those examples.
Like DSLs for Swift UI, like they had to do a lot of things to get to that point. Now, what is the difference? So what is the difference between span, an unsafe pointer, and how does this affect Objective-C code?
I wish I had a good answer for you, but unfortunately, I have been kind of ignoring that area. But you could get the right idea, even just by looking at the example that was presented during the State of the Union. There are many existing Swift APIs for interacting with pointers and interacting with buffers of values, and they're pretty unwieldy, and they can be quite difficult to get right. Variation, like subtle variations.
Right.
And I think this is just another way to provide a mechanism where the compiler and type system can understand the underlying data so that they can provide a safer API, but also it looked like a much more concise API as well.
I mean, one of the things about Swift in the early days was how all of a sudden we didn't have to deal with pointer. This looks like basically a friendlier way to do pointers, especially since there's interop with C++ and a few other languages that use pointers. This is what it seems like it's intended for.
Yeah, now that you're saying this, I'm interested too, because there are many Objective-C APIs that actually use pointers as well.
Right.
And I'm curious if they have incorporated this span stuff or fixed size arrays into any of their own like bridged APIs.
Right.
I predict no.
Based on previous results, yes. That's what I'm seeing.
A number of years ago, there was this system introduced called ExtensionKit.
Yes.
It was introduced on the Mac.
You talked about it.
Did I really? Okay.
Yeah.
So it was introduced for the Mac, and then maybe bits and pieces were a little bit available in iOS, but it was non-functional. Then the next year, big portions were introduced for iOS, but not the core bit you need to actually make it work, which is very suspicious.
Yeah, that is really suspicious.
Yeah, and I just assumed, something had gone wrong, and I predicted the next year it would show up, which it did not.
Okay.
Then the year after that, it also did not show up.
It showed up.
Yes, it did.
That is awesome.
I haven't actually played with it, but it certainly looks like it's functional.
Okay. Well, you'll have to come back and report those.
Yeah, I'm very interested.
Yeah. I think it's a lot.
No, that's it.
We'll be playing around with this, and I will be reporting back. I'm sure we'll have some more guests on the show when I get back to Michigan. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me for this.
It was wonderful.
Where can people find you online?
You can find me at massicotte.org.
And if you're looking for help with Swift 6.2 and concurrency, definitely check out his website. It's an excellent source for that. Thank you so much for joining me. If you want to try out macOS 26 and you don't want to break your laptop, definitely check out Bushel. It's on sale, pro subscription. Make sure you install Xcode 26 though. You can definitely play around with it there. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode, and I will talk to you when I get back home. Bye, everyone.